Live. How's it going, Mets fans? It's your boy Wardy, and as you can see, we're back at it with the latest edition of Mets Free Agent Frenzy live show. Even though that's been anything but a frenzy, it feels like in Mets land so far this offseason. We have seen the big domino fall in Shohei Ohtani. So how does this impact the market for the Mets and other clubs? Well, we have my man here, and Michael Marino, who does a fantastic job as an independent MLB reporter. Will be sharing his insights and also just his thoughts on the Mets as a whole as a fellow diehard fan, as we have key updates to get into for Yoshinobu Yamamoto, which is going to be a big week on his front as the Mets, Yankees, among many other clubs, are pursuing the coveted NPB star. Then from there, we're also going to get into potentially plan B options for rotation in the scenario where the Mets do not land Yamamoto. And no, I'm not saying this to get Mets fans freaked out. I'm just saying this. We need to kind of at least have some type of grasp as to what the Mets could do here, if anything can make sense as a plan B fit, should they lose out on Yamamoto in the end. And then from there, we'll get into Alvarez and his as he is looking for a potential long-term extension to stay in Queens for the foreseeable future and then some. And then we'll be wrapping up the show by answering some of your comments as well, along with potentially bullpen fits, as that has been a big toss-up as to what that could be for the Mets here this offseason. But before I go any further, shout out everyone first chiming in live on our replay. Greatly appreciate all you guys first chiming in. Really does mean a lot. Shout out all my members, Edwin, Dominic, AB, you know the list. Let's see, John as well. Thank you everyone first chiming in. But Michael, how you doing today, my friend?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. You know, we were saying off air, both of us are a little beat. Today was definitely a nap Sunday. We're getting ready for the big week. We always, even though Sunday's a star of the week, it never feels like the star of the week. Like Monday's a star of the week, right? So we're just trying to get ourselves ready to go, which is going to be a big week, not only for you. I'm sure that's going to be covering a lot of things in baseball, but for Yoshinobu Yamamoto. So we're not really going to hesitate from getting into that here shortly. But my big first question to you, Michael, is, what's your takeaway from the Shohei Ohtani sweepstakes? Like, just share it with me as not only a fellow baseball fan, but as someone that's involved in the industry, from the Toronto Blue Jays to now the LA Dodgers to the groundbreaking unprecedented contract and what that means with its deferrals. Just let me know how you feel about all that.
I mean, $700 million, a lot of money, right? Let's just start off with the obvious. What else say about the deferrals? I mean, the Dodgers have to be so happy for a few reasons. One, obviously you get Shohei Ohtani. Two, the deferrals is a huge part of this. And I'll kind of let the finance side of me out here. The rates are so high right now that if you're able to defer any part of that contract, financially speaking, one, the money, the actual financial side of it, the value goes down because money now is worth more than money later. And the other side is, as the rates go down in the future, you are talking about paying Shohei Ohtani way less than you would be if you gave him that $70 million a year now. So I'm expecting that to look like $40 to $50 million a year during those 10 years. It helps them because they can be competitive and, be aggressive to get other free agents like Yamamoto. I mean, it's a win-win for the Dodgers and for Shohei Ohtani. I kind of did the math. Like, they're roughly counting on, $400 to $500 million worth of on-field play value when you take out kind of the revenue he generates from the Japanese market and ticket sales and jersey sales and all that. So I think it's doable. Like, I think he could be worth $400 million, $500 million over 10 years. And so for the Dodgers, it's great for them. For baseball, it's great for baseball because, he's going to get more exposure than he ever has on a team that gets as much publicity as they do.
While I agree with that notion, I think you could also make a proper counter that his exposure would be at an even bigger, more all-time high if he did land, say, with a New York club, whether that's the Mets or the Yankees, just because that market in itself is unprecedented. Yes, the media is far and away more toxic than you could ever imagine in California, which I'm sure were driving factors to a degree in Ohtani's lack of willingness to want to come here, because we heard it from Steve Cohen himself. He didn't receive a call from his agent. He's like, and that's pretty telling on kind of where things stand there. I know, of course, it goes in hand with the Mets, where they currently stand as an organization. That, of course, plays a part. But, two, we've had this belief for a while with Ohtani that he just didn't want to be in this type of spotlight, which is perfectly fine. Like, there's no harm done there whatsoever. It may suck for us fellow fans. I would have loved to see him in either Queens or Bronx, wherever you're a fan of. But the reality is that this is his decision at the end of the day, and we have to respect it. But the implications of this contract and the deferrals. As someone who understands the finance side as well as you do, another question I have is, you've seen basically this witch hunt against Steve Cohen since he became owner, and really being very adamant with using the luxury tax, and how they have this whole new Cohen tax essentially because of him. And now with these deferrals, it almost feels like it's a loophole essentially that clubs can get away with, where they don't have to deal with the implications nearly as much. So my question to you is this something that you think we could see the Mets and other clubs have a heavy emphasis on going further? And two, is this something where there will then be some type of penalty because of it? Because the Dodgers are this first big example, and it feels like MLB might not necessarily know how to approach it, versus if this becomes more of a league-wide thing. So let me know your thoughts on that.
It's not like deferrals are new to baseball. I think
Right.
unprecedented deferrals are, and that's what we're talking about here, right? I mean, Mets fans are familiar with one certain Bobby Bonilla.
And sorry, just to cut you off for 1 second, because I've been saying this. You go from Bobby Bonilla making his mill every July 1st for the next how many
Yeah,
years, versus Shohei Ohtani going to be making that 20, 30 million a year,
sure.
multiple years, way past his retirement. So there's quite a gap there in the dollars you're
No,
getting. Yeah.
absolutely. No, the money for sure. I think the teams that are less financially capable have always looked to deferred contracts as an avenue. Um, I mean, you've seen. I'm blanking on whether or not it's Verlander or Scherzer. I want to say it's Scherzer from the Nationals contract. Like, he's
Yes,
still getting paid from the
correct.
Nationals, and it's big money. So it's not like this is new. Like, it's the unprecedented aspect in terms of the amount of dollars that are deferred. And there are contracts that are much bigger than Bonilla's that are paid out every year. And if you follow the great Mike Mayer, I mean, he tweets his deferral on that day, the list of deferred contracts. And a lot of those are way more than Bonilla. Point in case, deferred contracts are a great avenue for teams that are not financially equipped to take on, to pay those big players. It gives them an avenue to make that happen, but it can bite you in the butt. And that's why not all teams do it. Um, for some of these owners, like the idea of having to pay Shohei Ohtani, was never really an avenue. But that doesn't mean paying him $20 million for 15 years is a better avenue. I mean, that's still paying Shohei Ohtani 20 mil a year for 15 years. So maybe with the bigger players, if we're talking about kind of less financially equipped suitors that want to be big players for these guys, I think it might give them maybe a new avenue to do that. But when you're talking about teams like the Mets, where you're as cash equipped as they are, if you can, generally players want that money now. They don't want it later. They want it now. This was a special circumstance where Ohtani wanted the team to be competitive, and he didn't care if the money was deferred. What's important to note is players generally don't want deferred contracts. And in
Because they
this
want money
case, they
right
got
away.
lucky.
They're like, give me it now.
Exactly. Exactly. And so, maybe there's other circumstances like this one. Um, I think, let's say the Brewers really want to be competitive and there's a player that's worth 20 million a year that, they feel they need him to be competitive. They could always turn to deferred contracts. But when you're talking about a team like the Mets, it doesn't make as much sense because they know they can pay all that money up front and it won't really hurt them. You're looking at, right, like the Mets are paying these. You saw it impact their draft position this year. Obviously, there's penalties financially. When you start pushing money down the road, you will pay that penalty down the road. It's not like you're pushing your problems away. You're just pushing them down the line.
Okay, so
And
that's what's happening here with the Dodgers. They're still going to be
they're
penalized. It's just,
spreading it out.
I gotcha. Okay,
Yeah. So, I mean, it's going to be like, it's not like they're not paying that money anymore. I mean, they're paying it. It's
absolutely.
just, they'll be able to be a lot more competitive and have more money to spend in these 10 years under contract. And then they'll be paying him, X amount after that. So it makes it more doable for a team like the Dodgers I don't think every free agent is signing for $700 million. This is a special circumstance. But, I think it could be an avenue, but that would mean the player has to want his contract to be deferred. And that's usually not the case. I think the team is generally on board with it, depending on their financial situation. But usually it's the player that's not. And the Dodgers got lucky in this case. He was totally on board with it.
Yeah, he's the one that was the heavy advocate reportedly regarding this. Two things, Michael.
Yeah.
One, can you scoot a little bit to the right? And
Yeah.
two,
Is that
perfect. On
the other?
money. There
Okay,
you go.
we're good.
Awesome.
Perfect.
And secondly, I have a feeling that this could help, for fans of these teams, but for fans that are fans of smaller market teams, not so much, building super teams more so in baseball. I think that this is something that we can look at in the years going further. Because let's take, for example, let's just talk hypotheticals. Yamamoto signs with the Dodgers, right? That's in large part because of the deferred payments here with Ohtani, and also having Ohtani is a big appeal, of course. But if those deferred payments weren't happening, then you could pretty much count the Dodgers out more than likely right away for someone of his talents, looking for around $300+ million at this rate. So by having these deferred payments, this helps the likelihood of LA in the pursuit of not only Yamamoto, but will be the case, say, with the Yankees going further, with the Mets going forward. Like all these other clubs that are trying to build powerhouses can say, hey, we have the money, but we can push this down the line because we're focused on, say, this 5-year window. And this is the type of thing that I hope people start to realize the implications that this Ohtani contract has on the sport going forward will always be different now. It is ever changed because of this. And it's a big deal. I really hope people understand just how big of a deal this is. So now my next question for you is, okay, and I've talked a lot about this over the past 48 hours, but how this impacts the market now going forward with price point for players. Yes, Ohtani is a unicorn. There's no one else that's going to be getting that type of contract in the near future, at least. However, when you look at Yamamoto in particular, when you look at Juan Soto next offseason, when you look at Corbin Burns, Shane Bieber, these top talents available in these free agent markets, you'd have to imagine that this is going to help raise their price point naturally because of the magnitude of Ohtani's contract.
I think these players are going to cash in, honestly, regardless of Ohtani. And I'll tell you, like, specifically pertaining to Yamamoto, talked to someone who had a good read on his market, and I asked a week ago, what's kind of like that over-under at where you think that ends up? And I was told, like, 250, 260, maybe, 255, let's call it. Checked back with him today and said, you still thinking 250, 260? He said, I'm thinking 300 now. And so,
At
the
minimum.
price point just keeps on rising, and that's not including the posting fee. So, now we're talking 345. I think it would come out to like 346 and a half.
350,
And
370,
right,
if there's a bidding war,
right,
which there will be,
right. And so, I think it's probably going to end up at about 300 if I had to guess.
Okay.
Right now. Here's what I'll tell you. Like, my Twitter mentions, I'm sure you could believe, are just flooded with, like, are the Mets getting Yamamoto? Are the Yankees getting out? It's just like every other tweet. Here's what I'll tell you there. Like, if you have a strong guess one way or the other, it's a guess because no one knows. That includes the Mets. That includes the Yankees. His market is so uncertain because it's so big. There's so many teams in, and you can kind of limit that to, like, well, there's only 2 or 3 teams that are viewed to be like favorites, but there's still 2 to 3 teams that are viewed as favorites. And the Yankees feel good. And I know that, I was talking to people who kind of are familiar with their thinking here. They feel good about it. The Mets feel like they're as in it as they can be. And the Dodgers love him. They absolutely love him. But I've heard they have some reluctance to go to $300 million if it gets to that point for Yamamoto. And so it totally could come down to the Mets and the Yankees. But I want to hear it straight from the source that the Cubs, that the Giants, that some of these other teams
the Red
that
Sox
are in the mix
that no one's talking about.
Yeah, and part of that is because I asked about the Red Sox yesterday, and I was like, why am I not hearing about Boston? And it was like, we don't know what Boston wants to do because they like the player, but they're at the moment, like, they're showing a ton of interest in, like, Seth Lugo and guys like that. So maybe they're not thinking Yamamoto big at this point. It's unclear. I'm not comfortable saying one way or the other, but perhaps them showing a ton of interest in trying to win the Seth Lugo bidding war indicates maybe they're not trying to win the Yamamoto bidding war. So there's a ton of teams in. It's unclear how in some of these teams are. I think everyone assumes it's going to come down to like the Mets, Yankees, and Dodgers. Totally could be the case. Not yet comfortable saying that. Right? Like if you asked 6 months ago, I don't think anyone would have been comfortable being like, the Blue Jays are going to be a finalist for Shohei Ohtani. Like no one would have. I just don't think we're there. If you're asking me for a general timeline of when Yamamoto goes, my guess is about 11 to 12 days. I think we're still a little over a week away. Could be off here, just trying to read the market. My guess, if I had to put a date on it, would be like the 21st in
My
terms of
guess
when
is
he would go.
sometime, like the week of Christmas, but not Christmas Eve.
Not at Christmas.
Yes.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
totally.
Yeah. So that's also what I'm hoping for, because I got this weekend, I got, baby stuff that I'm worried about too, going to be a new dad. So I'm really hoping that I don't need to step aside and have to do a reaction on my phone when those things are happening. So literally, I will be in this seat like every single day, all throughout the week. And with my luck, it's going to be the one time I'm out of town. It's like, bam, that happens. Like, dude, I've literally pulled over on the highway multiple times. Just like
Gotta do what
Edwin
you gotta
Diaz's
do.
injury. Granted, this was on a much smaller scale, but it did very well in viewership because we didn't know how he would be impacting the club. But Luke Voigt, remember him when he was with the Mets this season? Like those type of things. Before we go further about Yamamoto, and also shout out BetUS, the sponsor today's video. We'll get to them shortly here. But before I do, I want to shout out Bobby G. Thank you so much for a $10 donation. This is Wardy. Congratulations. Thank you so much. This is for the Diaper Education Fund. I appreciate that because that's where everything's going now. Wish you and your soon-to-be family the best of health and happiness. I greatly appreciate that, my friend. Thank you. Thank you to everyone else for the well wishes over the past couple days. It has really, really touched me, to say the least. But now let's talk. Okay, so we talked about Yamamoto, and this is a huge week for him, right? Because, since the Yankees especially have landed Soto, I mean, everyone's at the floodgates. Everyone that has been talking is now talking, and I'm already fed up. I already want to be off social media entirely because everyone's locked to go to the Yankees. Don't you know that Corbin Burns is already in the Bronx as we speak? Like, the trade already happened. Like, that's how these fans are acting. So they're trying to build the evil empire. I give 100% kudos and credit to Brian Cashman for coming out fiery this offseason and kind of backing things up now. Like, I truly commend him for that as someone who's ragged on him, because the Yanks should be viewed as the evil empire every year. That's how they ran. And it doesn't mean that they're going to be a top dog every season, but this is what we know them to be. And for that to not be the case, it's been certainly enjoyable, but it still feels odd with the sport. It something doesn't feel right when the Yanks are in complete disarray. It's like, what's going on here? I much rather see them get their teeth kicked in by the Astros again in the ALCS versus, just seeing them not even make playoffs. Like, it's bizarre. It's good for the sport to see the top dogs be a continued top dog year after year. And speaking of said Yankees, they're meeting with Yamamoto tomorrow. They're flying to LA to meet with him because that's where his agency is based out of. This is a situation where, okay, the Mets already met over a week ago. They went all the way to Japan, had a nice French, mix with Japanese cuisine, some escargot, some sushi on the side. I don't know. Either way, it went great according to David Stearns, and it was awesome to see that clearly that has benefited the Mets here in their hunt for Yamamoto, as that has went well for the reporting has indicated such things. So, in your opinion, and also what you know at this point, what is your grasp right now in Yamamoto and his plans this week? Because we know he's back in the States now as of this weekend. He's meeting with the Yanks tomorrow. How many other teams, if you had to speculate, could you see him meeting with as soon as this week?
I don't have solid info in terms of which teams are meeting with
I'm not
him.
asking which. I'm just asking, like, do you think we could see 3-4 clubs Yamamoto meeting with this week?
I mean, I wouldn't be shocked for sure. Like,
right.
I know my understanding is the Cubs are a player. How serious of a player? Unsure. They're a player. I'm not 100%. There was an unconfirmed rumor that I was told that the Cubs may have met with him in Japan, like the Mets did.
Okay.
So they're a team to watch there. Um, I think the same. Like, I'm not sure how in the Dodgers are, especially if it gets to 300 million. I think if it gets to 300 million, they're probably going to bow out. If we're talking 250, 260, it's a different story. So we'll have to see kind of where the numbers end up here. I think that will be telling. But it's unclear how many teams have already met with him. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if we find out in 2 weeks that the Cubs met with him the same week that the Mets met with him in
Right.
Japan. That
Because
would
David
not
Stearns
surprise
did
me.
say it himself that what they did is a very standard thing that organizations do, but we're just talking about it now because it's in the public eye. So while reportedly the Mets are the only team we know since Yamamoto has officially been posted to meet with him in Japan, I agree with you. It wouldn't all be all that shocking if the Mets were one of multiple clubs over that week span.
Yeah, no, so that's where, I wouldn't be shocked. Like, it's almost standard protocol that if you have a lot of interest in a player, you're probably going to want to meet with him. So, let's say 3 teams meet with him this week, that could mean little to nothing. I know people are like, I've seen a ton of like chatter about like, well, the Mets need to meet with him again. Like, like they need to get him in the United States now that he's here. Like, it depends. We have no idea what the nature of their conversations were. Like, they could have talked money, they could have talked everything in Japan, or they could have talked nothing in Japan besides just like, oh, this is what, this is kind of a little bit about our organization. These are our values. And like, so without knowing kind of the context of what their conversations were, a second meeting might mean everything, or it might mean absolutely nothing, or somewhere in between. So, in terms of like, should we be concerned if the Mets don't meet with them again? Like, I wouldn't freak out, is what I would say. Like, we don't know what the context of their like, it was a good talk. Like, that could mean anything.
Right. Like, was it a
We just
simple meet and greet, where they're having the dinner? They did meet with his family as well. They had Kodai's interpreter there, too, to make things a little bit easier on the Mets end. Stearns emphasized, how we weren't necessarily trying to pitch the Mets as much as we were trying to amplify, like, what we are, what we're building, and, of course, how we can utilize you. And I'd imagine, really, not only banking on Kodai Senga's success, but just making it clear that they have a full understanding and grasp to utilize Yamamoto to his utmost potential right away. Because that's the type of sell job you're trying to do. Not as much about the organization as a whole. Maybe for Brian Cashman, maybe that's all you've been doing this entire time. Just saying, yeah, we got the reins. We have the history. You like you already. We have 18 waiting for you. Like, what else do we need to do? We might not be able to give you the
right.
highest offer, but we know you like all these things. So, and we have the history with failed Japanese players. If I'm not mistaken, isn't Tanaka and someone else going to be part of those meetings tomorrow? I have heard rumblings of that.
It was a Heyman, Martino. Sorry, you were saying, is it Matsui and Tanaka? That was shot down. They said that they would be there, but Martino said that he was hearing that rumor was not accurate. It's just going to be style. It's going to be ownership, and it's going to be Cashman and Yankees people, but not former players.
Yeah, I
my
know Boone will be
as
there
well.
because he had a grin on his face talking about this meeting, early into winter meeting. So, okay, I mean that's good to know. Certainly not something that I'm like, as a fan. Obviously, I don't want to see him go to the Yanks, but I think the Mets have as great of a shot as ever to land him. And as I emphasized in yesterday's video too, if this really does come down to a bidding war, which it firmly believes it's going to, because Yamamoto is in this very unique situation, similar to Ohtani, where like he's just a kid in a candy shop. Like, he's far and away the most talented player and the highest desired player on the free agent market now, and he has 5, 6, 7, 8 teams at his disposal that all would love him or drooling over him. And he can kind of just, pick and choose. Okay, I'm going to take my time here. Ooh, I like this, but I like this as well. So, he's not going to rush these things. But if we're talking about dollars, it's really hard to believe that the Mets wouldn't come out on top here, knowing how adamant they are for him. This is a different circumstance than the Ohtani sweepstakes Soto ones, where there were valid reasoning as to why the Mets weren't heavily involved there, in part because of what the Mets couldn't control. Soto, it was the trade return. They didn't have the assets that the Yanks were able to provide. side. For Ohtani, the long belief that he didn't want to be here, and the Mets organizationally aren't in a position that would probably be as enticing, of course, as the Dodgers and some other clubs. So you understood those. But Yamamoto, again, the factor is the Mets are looking for someone exactly like him. Like, he fits the bill, and by not landing him, they're not going to have a pivot plan, at least what we know in the public eye at this point, that's going to be nearly as enticing, as exciting for 2024 and going forward. So we saw Ohtani get $700 million. That's crazy, right? We would have never thought that a team would go there for his liking. It's not shocking that the Dodgers did, because they've been focused on him for a number of years now, waiting for this build-up. But when you look at Yamamoto and you look at the belief that Steinbrenner is going to be willing to go past the luxury tax without a problem, that the belief that some other clubs, the Toronto Blue Jays are desperate to make a big move now. Could they make a heavy pivot here? You look at the Boston Red Sox, they could be involved. Obviously, the Chicago Cubs were involved in Ohtani's market. They could allocate that money towards Yamamoto should they wish. So when it gets down to dollars, are you under the same belief that I am, that it feels like it's the Mets to lose here? Because yes, David Stearns and them, they have their limit, but what other teams would go out of their way to do, why wouldn't the Mets do, knowing that he isn't a short-term option?
I'm not willing to say that the Mets will come out the high bidder until I see that bidding play out.
Okay.
I think, every team has their number. And just like, all other 29 teams, I'm sure the Mets have their number to where Stearns believes it's hurting the future of their team. Now, I don't know what that number is. That could be 350, that could be 400, that could be 300. I don't know what that number is.
Right.
But everyone has that number. Now, here's what I'll say. I think something that worries the Mets, and this is the only thing that they can't control, is there two things. One, there's the sentiment that he really wanted the West Coast if it came down to it. That's not true. If anything, he prefers the East Coast to the West Coast, I was told. That's one part of it.
Okay.
The second part of it is team success, a team rich in history and winning. That is something that I've been told does matter to him. And I don't think that's going to be the main decision maker. I think the money is, but I think it might be the tiebreaker. And so if we're here, in 2 weeks, and we're talking about it, and the Mets have an offer at, let's say this bidding war goes crazy, it's 320, and the Yankees have their offer in that, they're at 320. I wouldn't be shocked if he picks the Yankees over the Mets, because they have that rich history and, tons of wins, and they have all the rings. That might play a part here. And that's where the money, it could be that separator. And so I think the Mets have more to lose here than anyone else. I think that's
agree.
undoubtable. And so that's what might push them past everyone else, who's this public perception of how are you going to sell the offseason after missing out on Ohtani, Soto, and Yamamoto? I think that's something they're wary of if we miss on this guy, our offseason looks a lot worse. But my information here is they have a plan with Yamamoto. They also have a plan if they're unable to get Yamamoto. And they're prepared for both scenarios. It's possible they can't control it, right? They're the high bidder and they still lose. That's something that they're aware of. And so they do have backup options in place if this isn't to work out. But it's pretty simple. This is their top option. This is the guy they want. And they're not going to go down without trying. And that's their intention here.
Yeah, and as I've been saying all along, if Yamamoto doesn't come to Queens, one, it isn't going to be for a lack of effort, and two, it may very well just come down to that personal preference. Now, what I'm curious about, because the rich history with the Yanks is obviously something that can't be denied. However, what is the importance level in that when you look at a club that hasn't won anything in 14 years, hasn't been to the dance, and, the Mets have been to the dance sooner. I understand that the Mets don't, of course, have the championship resume, and that's something that's always going to hurt them when players have this type of mindset until they finally get to where they need to be. We have yet to see that. However, if we're really basing things on said history, like there's a rightful argument that how much does that matter when the bulk of said championships that were being done were way before you were even a thought, it's just these are interesting factors that I'm very curious and excited to find out how this is going to play into either the Mets' favor or against them. But as you noted, and this is why I did my video yesterday, I just have this firm belief that those factors will come into play, and this is what it's going to mean for Cohen to have to do an overpay, like we've seen with Max Scherzer, like we've seen with Verlander. Like, you may have to really blow other teams out of the water to get it done. And at that point, if we get to 350, maybe not even clean posting fee, so north of 4, do you think that the potential still outweighs the risk there over, say, a decade-long contract? Or is that, if just asking from a personal opinion, where would you draw the line in the sand if you're David Stearns and Steve Cohen here?
I'll say it now. I don't think this is going to go to 350. I would be surprised if it goes to 350.
Same way we were surprised about 700 with Ohtani.
Fair enough. I mean, and that's the counter. I mean, I would be really surprised. I think there was so much buzz. Think about a year back with Senga. Like, like Mets fans wanted this guy. He seemed like a perfect fit. It was like, this guy is everything you want, and you think he projects well. And then the final numbers come in. You're ready for 100, 125, and it's 5 years, 75, and you're like, that was a steal, And so I don't think that's what's going to happen here. But at the same time, I would be pretty surprised if we start talking about 350 pre-posting fee. I'll believe. I think some execs would be surprised if it gets to 300. So that's not myself. That's just kind of polling around the league and seeing what people think.
Right.
I think it ends up like at 300. Now, the separate conversation you're talking about of like what's the line in the sand of like we can't exceed this. Man, that's tricky. Like, there's a reason I'm not the president of baseball ops for the Mets because I'm telling you, give them 325, give them 350. Yeah. I mean, I think he's a great player.
I'll give him my fucking leg. I don't care. Like, just get it done.
Exactly. Exactly. And so, like, I've talked to teams that their modeling projects him as a potential top 5 pitcher in baseball. And the cost of that is probably around $300 million. And that's what these teams are banking on, is these projections, turning out to be the case. And so we need to kind of see how this pans out. If the baseball executives I would talk to, if I had to guess, maybe 325 is what really takes them out here of like 325. It's a huge gamble. He's never played in the MLB, maybe. Let's not forget, like, this is a huge transition. Like, Senga, if you remember in spring training, he had a few rough outings, and he said he's getting used to the baseball, and it's entirely different than what they use in Japan. Like, there is a transition. There will be downs for Yamamoto. If you're thinking he's just going to come in and be an ace from the go, like, he will experience his fair share of ups and downs.
I have a feeling we're going to experience similar walk rate issues too.
No, totally. Like, he has great stuff. Like, I've talked to some really smart people who judge pitchers for a living and get paid. And one of their concerns, and it's a minor concern, is the profile of his slider. What you find with Japanese pitcher, and this is something that James Shiano had talked about, that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is, when you look at Japanese pitchers who throw sliders, the ones that profile better at the major leagues are the ones that go top to bottom. If you're talking about a guy like Syndergaard had a great one that dropped, I think, maybe 6 to 12 inches.
Yeah, it was nasty.
Even DeGrom had that, right? The top to bottom slider. Now, when you're talking about Yamamoto, his is more of a sweeper. And those traditionally don't profile over to the next level when you're talking about Japan to the major leagues, as well as some of those top to bottom sliders. So I think there's just going to be a lot of adjustments here. Like I think he's young, right? I mean, we're talking about a 25-year-old here.
Really puts my
I
life
think
in
there's
perspective. Yes.
in totally. I mean, I don't think we're talking about a finished product here. Like, I think
Right.
he's going to have to adapt to the major leagues. And I think teams understand that, which is why giving a guy who you think is going to have to adjust to the major leagues 325 million, that might be a concern for some teams. And, if this is, let's say, Stearns' big, first big money expenditure, and we're talking at the end of next year and Yamamoto looks like a mess, well, now he's under fire. Obviously, all the fans are like, let's go. We got Yamamoto. But at the end of the year, if he puts up, bad numbers and you paid him, like you gave him the bag, well, now he looks like a fool. And so, you know, just as much like the Mets want him just as much as everyone involved, but they also understand there's risk here. And when you're backing up that risk with $325 million, well, now there's a lot of risk. And that's what they have to weigh here. But the upside is just so big to where maybe they still are in if it gets to 325.
So, something that's being brought up in the chat, and it is an interesting thought process. David Stearns, of course, notorious for making the most on a small budget with his moves during his time with the Milwaukee Brewers. Now he doesn't only just have a big budget, but of course, and part why the Mets hired him is being able to still find those key pieces and really spread your worth, especially on the pitching front for both rotation and bullpen. But knowing that you still hired someone that, at the end of the day, at the core, is a diehard fan like Cohen, you have to wonder how much, if at all, that fan perspective will come into play in a unique situation like this, where it's a bidding war. It's a guy that you want and desperately need, but knowing that he just makes so much sense for you for the next decade. I think if this was a 30-year-old Yamamoto, we would have a bit of a different discussion, actually. I think the 5 years plays so much in the Mets' hand here and their philosophy and their viewpoint on him that I'm really interested to see, like, if is David Stearns going to kind of have a moment like Billy Epler, because we know how much Billy loved Kodai. He loves these Japanese pitchers. Like, you could tell Billy, like, had the excitement not only, from a work perspective, but also just probably from a fan perspective and bringing in someone of Senga's caliber. Really curious to know what that type of level, if there will be any type of difference with how Stearns operate in that sense from the Astros and Milwaukee to now being with the Mets. Like, you of course have to have that balance. They're not going to act like drunken sailors. Cohen has learned that the hard way already over his past couple of years as owner. So they're going to be disciplined, and that's what Stearns is known for. But that fandom element certainly is an intriguing thought as to how it could play potentially in the Mets' hand here. Not to say that there aren't fans of, fans of execs and respective organizations, but, when your owner and your Pobo, both big Mets fans, how do you not like that if you're a fellow Mets fan like ourselves?
Totally. I mean, you know, I've learned a whole lot about David Stearns. And at the end of the day, this is an analytical guy that has his number. No matter how much of a fan he is, he has a number and he doesn't get reckless with it. And, they have a clear plan. You saw that, they're not suitors for someone like Tyler Glass now. They're not looking at rentals. They're not looking to give away prospects to win now. It's a long-term plan here. And I don't think they're going to freak out if they miss on him. And there's varying opinions there, like totally. But I think he has his number, just like every other team in the mix here. And, I think him being a fan plays a role. But at the same time, like, he's done this for 8 years now. Like, he's not new to baseball, and he's just a fan who's smart. Like, he knows how this works, and I think he's going to be smart about it. He's going to come in with his number. That number could be higher than everyone else's number, but he's going to have a number. And they really want this guy. There's no doubt about it. But, he's an executive at the end of the day. He's done it for 8 years at this level. I think he knows where he sits. And I think he also understands that there is a price for every player. And they could hit theirs here, and that could still be $20 million higher than everyone else. So I want to see it play out. I'm not comfortable naming a favorite. I think undoubtedly the Mets have the most to lose here. That doesn't mean they have the highest shot. And so we'll kind of see over the next few weeks how that progresses. Tomorrow, Yankees meet with him. I can already tell you how, what you're going to see. Yankees had a great meeting with him. It went perfect. They met, him, his agent, and they feel great about it.
The Yankees, who
Well,
were
what did the
already
Mets do?
perceived as the favorite, continue to be perceived as the favorite. It's going to be from Martino. Book it. 2:30 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. Lock it in.
Exactly. Of course it's going to go well. Obviously, they're going to feel great about it. They're going to leave. Well, let's see how it plays out. I don't want to name a favorite. The Mets are very in. The Yankees are very in. We'll see over the next few days and weeks kind of how this thing progresses. But just like every other team, the Mets have their number, and I think they're comfortable walking away if they don't think it's smart for the long-term health of the organization.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And it's easy for us fans to get enamored by the prospect of landing a top player, one of the teams heavily going after them. And it's always going to be crushing in the situations where they don't land them. Like even Carlos Correa, the entire sweepstakes, for me, especially, that was unbelievably crushing. Like it was just a whole month-long saga of just daily talk of just repetition a lot. Not too far off with what we're talking about with Yamamoto here, because we haven't found out too much more of new information to this point. That's why this week is so vital, because I think we're going to find out a boatload of new information that'll either, help the Mets' favor, maybe not help them. Like, we're going to get a clear idea as to where the Mets stand by the end of the week here in their hunt here for the coveted MPB star. People have been bringing up what I said yesterday, too. Also have to wonder, again, not only preferences, but what is Yamamoto's idea of being a headlining ace in a rotation? How much does that matter to him, if at all? Because if he goes to the Yanks, he's not going to be that. He will be that two-headed monster with Cole, yes, but Cole is still the guy there. Versus coming to the Mets, Senga's like, by all means, please, just go right here. Take the seat. No problem. If he goes to Boston, same applies. If he goes to Chicago, same applies. If he goes to the Dodgers, same applies. Yes, he'll be overshadowed by Ohtani when it talks about name, but when regarding the rotation right now, he is that guy. So that's another thing where I'm curious if that may play a factor at all when evaluating his market. But before we go further, because I do see some donations and we really want to transition here into potential plan Bs for the Mets. Before I do, I have to let you guys know about today's video sponsor, and that is our great friends at BetUS. For those that don't know BetUS is America's leading sports book, and as we've discussed in previous streams, we're coming at you with some big Yamamoto odds as to where he'll be taking his talents for the 2024 season. And as you see here, BetUS spruced this up for me recently and has the New York Mets as the betting favorite right now at plus 200 to land his services. The Yanks right behind him at plus 300, the Dodgers plus 300, the Red Sox plus 400, and the Giants plus 500. So if you're trying to get in on the action, get in on these odds right now, or do your over-unders, however you go about your sports betting, make sure you click the link in the description so you get 125% profit boost. So if you say deposit $100, you're automatically getting $225 just like that to work with. Of course, with bias, I'm taking the Mets here, but naturally, if you're trying to put that bias aside, things can quite literally be a toss-up. So stay tuned. BetUS, not only a great sponsor on the channel, but we're going to be doing some unique Wardy parlays heading into the season, all Mets-centric. It's going to be a lot of fun throughout the offseason heading into the 2024 year. So make sure you get in on today, as they are both safe, secure, and reliable. And again, shout out BetUS as always for being a sponsor of today's video. But now getting back into this one, Michael, we got a donation from John that says the following. Thank you, John, for the donation. Great member. John's been very much more on the pessimistic route, I've noticed, this offseason versus the past 2 years. I can tell the vibe with him is not the same. And he says, if we don't land him, does that mean we're punting the season? Every pitcher we've signed is coming off bad years. Do we trust Hefner that much to fix him, or are we all waiting for 2025, 2026 to compete? This is a perfect transition into potential plan B option for this rotation, because we've been under this belief that if the Mets do not land Yamamoto, that they may just stick short-term options. Jordan Montgomery, they would absolutely love, but how heavy would they amplify a pursuit for Monty in the scenario where they don't land Yamamoto, and knowing that Monty is not going to be a frontline starter for you? How much do the middle guys matter to them in really seeing what's the best out there on the market versus, say, trying to get creative in different ways where, David Stearns can do what he does best by grabbing a bunch of arms that are all our MLB caliber talents that for different reasons are going to be on shorter term solid AAV deals. So my question to you is, What do you perceive the Mets to do here in the situation that they lose out on Yamamoto? And should this be at all concerning for fans that are having the expectation that this team will be competing heavily for 2024?
I mean, here's kind of my thought here. Like, from my impression, they really like Montgomery. The two other teams to watch there are Boston, who's shown a ton of interest in
And he's
guys
living
like
there right now.
Seth Lugo. That the other team here is the Rangers, who Ken Rosenthal reported kind of like doubts about how possible that might be. And so, the Mets, they could be real players there. I think if they miss out on Yamamoto, they become real players there. Like, I think he's there too. Probably Snell is their 3, and then like Shoto is their 4, maybe. If I had to guess kind of how that lines up. I mean, I don't think I think they understand kind of how these pitchers are viewed and where they slot in the rotation. I don't think it's news to them that, the pitchers after Yamamoto are not nearly as good as he is. Like, I think they understand that.
Yeah.
But I think they're going to become reckless if they lose on Yamamoto and just start throwing money at whatever is left. Like, it's totally possible. They're like, you know what? We're going to grab Monty. We're going to grab Snell. We're going to grab Shoto. And then we're going to get another Severino type, a 1-year guy. Like, 2024, I think they view it as like, let's be a sneaky team that can make the playoffs as a wild card team, make a run. They're fun. They're exciting. They're coming in as doubters, and they prove everyone wrong. And then 2025, it's like, all right, you loaded up. You got 2-3 guys, way less holes on the roster. Let's make a serious run here.
Right.
And I think that's kind of how they view this. Like, they're not punting on this year, but I also think they might be punting on being perceived as, World Series favorites.
Well, we all knew that, though. I feel like if you've just been paying attention, no one should head into 2024 with the expectation that they're World Series contenders or favorites. And I think by having that pressure, that is what would hurt this team, especially because Mendoza, first-year manager, needs to get his feet wet and get acclimated, right? And he's going to go through a lot of highs and lows himself. The players as well. They could not handle the pressure to save their lives over the past year plus, right? So I agree with you wholeheartedly there. And I think the D-backs and the Phillies over the past year or two are prime examples that you just need to get in and see what you can do from there. That's the biggest thing. The Braves of their dominance having like the most historic offense this year. The Dodgers the year prior having like the most regular season wins. What did that get them? Absolutely jack shit nothing. So while regular season entertainment with baseball is great, that literally means nothing. No one's thinking about the 2022 Dodgers. No one's thinking about the 2023 Braves. Why? Because you know how their seasons ended, and those fan bases aren't happy about it. So, no, I'm in 100% agreement with you there. You don't need to be the prettiest team on paper to be effective.
Absolutely. No, and like you said, the teams that kind of go into the playoffs with the mentality of like they're playing with house money, those have been the teams that kind of wreak havoc in the playoffs. Right. And so that's what, like, they want to be a sneaky wild card team. I think they understand like there's a gap at least in terms of talent when you're comparing them to, let's say, the Phillies or the Braves. I don't think they believe they're going to make that up, before the start of this year. But I think they are confident and comfortable with the idea that, next year that might be a different story, but that doesn't mean they're punting on this year. They're still going to field a major league roster. This is not a team that's winning, 60 games. Like, they're going to field a competitive team. They're going to do their best to try to be a sneaky team that kind of everyone doubts and then ends up proving, at least in their hopes, ends up proving the doubters wrong. That's how they're kind of approaching this.
So, and another thing, too, that I think fans should keep in mind, every organization, unless they're in truly a win now, which is like what the Yanks are, for example, this offseason, and kudos to them for doing that. But for the Mets here, you're looking on the next couple years in those free agent markets as well. And next year's free agent market, barring changes to potential extensions, which Yeah, Milwaukee, they need to prove me wrong to show that they're going to commit to Corbin Burns. Cleveland, you need to prove me wrong. They're going to commit to Shane Bieber. Like, these are high-profile, top talent names that will be available next offseason, which is why, when you view it from that perspective, it wouldn't be shocking if, say, they lose out on Yamamoto, or even when they get Yamamoto, that they may not do many other long-term deals. Like, they may focus more on the shorter end, because in reality, they could view this, Stearns is going to use his numbers and say, how the math is playing out right now, we can get this amount of wins out of these pitchers heading into next season if we combine them all in this sense, and then we can really jump for these other talents, one if not multiple ace caliber starters a year from now, versus this year's market. Yes, Blake Snell is absolutely ace, just won a Cy Young Award. Congratulations to him. Do you want to commit 7 years to Blake Snell? There are a lot of people that have reluctancy to do so, and it's going to take likely a contract of that caliber to land him. Does he have an interest in coming here? I don't know. Do the Mets have a heavy interest there? There has been a belief that there is. Monty, I think, makes so much sense as your middle of the rotation guy, where I think he could still be an exception, even though that I feel like it's a pipe dreaming. If the Mets land Yamamoto, they would still land Monty. But Shota Imanaga, what is the interest level there? That's a guy that you would land on presumably a Kodai Senga structured contract, 4 or 5 years. And maybe have an opt-out if you have similar health issues, because we have seen these MPB pitchers have wear and tear on their elbow, especially if, like, Imanaga is similar to Senga. He's been pitching the past north of a decade there in the MPB. And I'm not exactly sure what his health status is, but it's just something to evaluate. So the Mets, it shouldn't shock anyone if they head into this entire situation and say, hey, we landed a top pitcher that we were hoping for, whether it's Yamamoto or Monty. The rest, we're going to go with more of these mid to lower level signings, because we do not want to take away the opportunity to go bigger and better next offseason when we feel far more comfortable and equipped to go on the run we're trying to do.
Yeah, and these are things that the team thinks about. Like, they look ahead into potential free agents a year out. Sometimes that hurts them. Like, I had heard when they bowed out on Carlos Correa, they looked ahead and said, well, Manny Machado is a free agent next year. There's no way the Padres are going to pay him. Well, the Padres paid him. It doesn't look pretty now, but they paid him.
And in defense, so they probably didn't know Sidewar's health status at the time either, because that was the biggest one.
No,
for sure.
Totally. So, teams talk a year out all the time. They always look at the guys who are going to be free agents the following year. I mean, these are things that the teams look into. It's kind of their job to make sure that when you're talking about a team like the Mets, they don't love the third base options on the market. My guess is they like the third base options next year more than the ones that they like this year. That's where decisions are made. Like, we're going to see what we got, evaluate our young guys. They can say it all they want. Realistically, they probably just don't love the options this year. And when you're looking at the board next year, they like them more next year. These are conversations they have. They always look a year ahead. But, absolutely. Like, they are conscious and they understand that there might be better options a year from now at a certain position group than there are now. And these are things they talk about, and they at least try to have those, opinions and their beliefs about next year's class impact how they approach this year's class.
Yes. So I'm glad you kind of reaffirmed that thought process, because it's, again, there's so many factors that go into this, and especially if you're just, the average casual fan that just, briefly following along with what's going on each and every offseason, because I can tell you this as someone before I got invested in content creating was far more under this mindset at times. It was, okay, the Mets didn't get this guy. I was like, oh, for F's sake, of course they didn't, because it was because of this reason or that reason, when in reality, there's so many more factors that come into play when evaluating situations like this. So I just like to reiterate them, especially for fellow fans, because a lot of times it's never as clear cut as like, okay, so for example, the Mets are out on Ohtani. That means that Cohen's being cheap and he has no interest, right? Or that just because Ohtani, hates the Mets. Like, it's silly notions that we build as fans, and I like to clear the air there a bit. But I think we talked enough about Yamamoto for now, because we still have a lot more to go. So now let's talk about Francisco Alvarez. What's your thoughts on seeing these reports that Alvy is looking for a potential long-term extension, and how likely could you see that happening over the next calendar year?
Here's what I'm going to say. Like, I think the fan perspective is going to be different than the team perspective.
Yeah.
I love Francisco Alvarez. I think he's a great player. He definitely like eased some people's concerns about him with the defense. I think the bat was definitely streaky, right? It felt like he was an every other month type of player where he like raked and then he like couldn't hit for a month. And then he raked again. And I, it really, there's not a lot of press out about how David Stearns views Francisco Alvarez. And I'm not comfortable assuming the team feels one way or the other until I hear from David Stearns' mouth that this is a guy that he believes should be on the team for 6-7 years. And, I think we see with these younger players that the second year is huge because a lot of those rookies, they spend all off season and these players kind of game plan around what they saw the first year and they use it against them in the second year. You'll see a lot of slumps, but then the real major league players that are going to be around for a while, those guys, like they make sure that they make, stand out amongst the pack. Part of me wonders if Stearns wants to see that second year. Here's what I'm going to say. Like, they have so many new guys in player development, like Andy Green and all these new guys in the staff who have pretty much zero time so far to evaluate what they have in house. It's why they don't want to give up on guys like Beatty and Vientos.
Exactly.
They want to know what they have there. I think the same can be said about Alvarez. Like, he had, a pretty good rookie year, but it wasn't all up. There was some ups and some downs, and I think they want more time to see how he plays. I would be surprised, and I could be wrong. Like, they could extend him tomorrow, and I'm whatever. But I would be a little surprised personally if they just extend him, no questions asked, and it's like, boom, all right, well, now Alvarez is your catcher for 6-7 years. I want to see that to believe it. I think my guess, and this is just kind of knowing how Stearns operates, my guess is he wants a little bit of time for himself to evaluate the player, and have his people evaluate the player before he hands out multi-year extensions, unless he feels there's real, financial value of like, we could be saving X amount of dollars because this is a player we really like who's going to hit the market in a few years, and we can buy those years out now because we know he's going to be here.
Yep.
We just don't know how he views it. And until I hear him express how he views Alvarez in depth or some type of reporting about how he views Alvarez, I'm not comfortable jumping to the conclusion that he's like eager to lock him up. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I know from Tim Healy's article yesterday, highly implore you all to check it out if you haven't. It does a great job for Newsday. Did really make note of Stearns' initial philosophy when evaluating extensions for young talent as a whole. Not speaking on Alvarez in particular because Stearns has yet to comment. He was not able to comment according to Healy's article. However, he's open to it, and that's something that he was actually a heavy advocate of as assistant GM during his time in Houston, and was something that he was an advocate of during his time in Milwaukee. And he did it and utilized a couple players in particular where he signed them to 5+ year extensions. And that's something that very well could be a beautiful fit for Alvarez. Now, whether you're buying out those pre-arb years or not is a different situation. But if you're saying hypothetically you didn't, then if you sign him to a 5-year extension, that's 10 years of control for Francisco Alvarez. I mean, that's exactly, I think, what all of us fans are hoping. We want to see this Mets team start to build the Atlanta Braves type mindset. Even though that they got away like bandits and they shouldn't have been able to scout the players that they did, that's a completely different discussion in its own right. But Ozzie Albies, 7 years, $37 million extension. He's getting pennies. Acuna, 8 years, $100 million, the best contract in baseball, you could rightfully argue. Brewers are trying to get ahead of the game now. 8 years, $86 million extension to a 19-year-old. Corbin Carroll entering this past season, $100 million extension. So we're seeing these things with young, really high upside talents. And Alvarez showed those flashes. Yes, he had a brutal end to the season, but so did the entire club. I just think that was a young, immature Alvarez that kind of lost stock in the season, knowing that there was nothing that was going to happen post-trade deadline. 25 home runs, 97 WRC+, 95th percentile framing, one of the hardest hitters and already in baseball. Yes, expected batting average is dog shades and the 2% percentile. He has a lot of cleaning up to do with his discipline at the plate, but we saw those flashes throughout the summer. Those couple months span, like, he proved just how vital he can be. And the biggest question mark Alvarez had heading into this season, which is in part why he didn't even crack the roster out of camp, was because of his defense. A heavy reluctancy, to really get him jump-started when his defense was subpar. However, comes in, and he's automatically the Mets' best defensive and overall well-rounded catcher. The framing blew me away. His arm strength, obviously, we've all known it, but just his ability, his blocking definitely had its struggles throughout the course of the season. Sometimes he looked great, other times it's like, how does that happen? I think that went more so earlier in the year when both offensively and defensively, the guy just was really rattled. You could tell that he was just trying to get his feet under him and get adjusted at the MLB level still. But I think at earliest, personally, just my gut talking, maybe a mid-season extension could be had for Alvarez, because that gives time for Stearns to kind of see what he has. And if Alvy comes out guns a-blazing or just continues to show how vital that power bat is as defense is really helping win games, because, if he's being a great play caller, that's going to help with the run prevention naturally, right? And those are things that David Stearns certainly cares about. So I think mid-season at earliest is what we could look at for someone like him. It would be an awesome mid-season present, so we'll see what happens on that front. But I love the fact that we're hearing from Alvarez that he not only is open, but you can tell he would have liked to make it happen. And for him, the upside, if those pre-RBers are bought out, he's getting big bucks right away. So I understand the appeal on his end there. And for the Mets, the appeal is, okay, you might just be able to lock down your franchise catcher for the next decade plus, just like that, on what is hopefully going to be a bargain, as long as the projections show that he's going in the route that they hope he's going down. Because those projections are the biggest key here. They're not focused nearly as much about what he did in 2023 as they are what you're going to do 2024, 2025, so on, so forth. So with that being said, let's get into our final segment here before answering a couple comments and wrapping things up. Bullpen fits. I know that you clearly understand exactly who the Mets are going to sign for setup, for, middle relief, for lawn relief, all these things, but putting the sarcasm aside, putting your fan cap on here specifically, what would you like to see the Mets do for their bullpen, evaluating the free agent market and potential trades? Like, we know David Stearns loves to throw a lot of these options out there versus having all your eggs in one or two baskets, and I think that will ultimately bode this team well, because you need as much depth as possible. But when you look at the names out there, are there any in particular that you think, oh, I would actually like him in this Mets bullpen for 2024?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm putting my fan cap on, like, I wouldn't be opposed to seeing David Robertson as another year as a Met. Like, I think that went generally well for them. They traded him at the deadline. They got a solid return. Like, I think that experiment went well. I think what they need is high floor options, because right now they've got a lot of high ceiling options, not a lot of floor.
Right.
It's hard to say names. I'll say Robertson is someone I would like to see back with the team. Like, he said he enjoyed it. He didn't want to leave. I think he had was in for a rude awakening on the Marlins. So I wouldn't be shocked to see him want to come back. But I do think they need some high floor options, because right now they're reaching for ceiling. These guys are just so volatile. The analytical organizations in baseball, they don't like throwing money at relievers because of how volatile these guys are. Like, Josh Hader could look like the worst pitcher in baseball, and 10 seconds later look like the best pitcher in baseball. And they know that's how this works. And that's why I think it's important to see it. Like, he traded away Josh Hader, Stearns did, when he was in Milwaukee at his peak. And that was – I've seen a lot of discourse about, like, well, they're cheap. And, like, there's two things to be said. One, like, he definitely understood that it was going to be unlikely they were going to extend Hader. But at the same time, my understanding was ownership was not begging him to trade Josh Hader. They wanted him on the roster. And part of the reason why he's no longer in Milwaukee was because he traded Hader, and the ownership was not really happy about it. So the way you've used bullpen, like you said, is kind of spreading the wealth across, kind of sending 100 shots in the dark as opposed to like 5. And so I want to see kind of how – I think they're probably going to get one or two relievers that you and me both know who they are.
And then the rest is just a whole lot of what?
I mean, Jorge Lopez, like, at one point in his career, like, was great. rough year for him last year, but like there is definitely upside there. There's upside with a lot of these guys. Like I'm sure Hefner identified a few things that he thinks he can clean up with some of these guys.
Not only
But
Hefner too, and I'm sorry to cut you off because Edwin
no, go
Diaz
yeah,
was interviewed just over this past day because I think he was a part. I think he was at least in attendance for the PR like home run derby charity event. Have Vladdy Guerrero Jr. there, in which his younger brother is going to be a Met next year, which is exciting. Francisco Lindor, among some others. And when asked about Jorge Lopez, he replied saying, he's excited, a very good reliever, and he thinks it's going to bode him well. I'm rekindling that relationship with Jose Rosado, who of course was in their coaching staff for Team Puerto Rico for the WBC. So that's something that I'm excited about too, to see how that relationship will, because Lopez looked disgusting in the WBC. I know it was a small sample size,
absolutely.
but with the adrenaline pumping in big moments, like the guy was filthy with the off speed, the velo touches triple digits on the gun. Like there are plenty of things. He has the stuff. He's just a great example of a lot of relievers where you have the stuff, but you're missing the command, or you have the stuff, or you don't have that one pitch working for you this season. Like there are a lot of things that go into it, because I know that when he went to Baltimore at the end of the season, that they were working on one of his pitches again, and he was seeing a higher success rate. So
Absolutely. No, and like what's important to understand, and like I think this puts it into perspective when you're talking about relievers, right? Like a great season for relievers, 70 innings. When you're talking about a starter, like how far into the season is 70 innings, right? Like you're hoping your ace goes 200 innings, and we're talking about the best relievers going 70. So we're talking about, a third of an ace's season. And, think about any great pitcher, like they could have a third of their season, be pretty shitty. And we're talking about that's an entire reliever's season. And so that's why these guys are so volatile. Like it's all a guessing game and kind of banking on your projections or, the scouting that you think you can work on XYZ and that'll help him down the stretch. And so like these are things they're going to talk about when evaluating these guys.
no, I 100% agree. And just looking at the free agent market right now, of course, trade market, there are a lot of appealing names out there, but it is like as much of a toss up as ever, because now we're not just speculating the team acquiring them, but it's like, okay, now you need to give up assets too. So I'm gonna refrain from doing that right now. But right off the riff, David Robertson would love him back in the setup role. Another thing that's beautiful about David is he gets lefties out really, really good, and a lot of times even better than righties. That is what makes him so good, especially that type of role where he didn't get to utilize all season long. He became the closer when his full intention heading into the year initially was to be your eighth inning guy. So I think the lack of pressure on his shoulders too would build him well and help with those walk rate at times. I also look at the likes of Matt Moore coming off of a very successful season, splitting time with 3 teams this year. The veteran who just a couple years ago was a starter in the Phillies rotation after coming back from overseas, transferring the pen for the Texas Rangers a year ago, and the guy has been lights out. Really, really like Matt Moore. Wouldn't mind him as an option either. Going down the list further, I've always been a big Shintaro Fujinami guy since I found out about him early last offseason. Wanted the Mets to get him then, didn't happen. He has all the stuff, but has nothing, no, very little control. Really struggle to command himself, but ridiculous arm where there's utmost amount of potential there. And then going down even further, Robert Stevenson coming off of a really, really good year with Tampa. Something I will say about Stevenson, though, as much as I would love him, I want to see the Mets get in that Rays way, which is what Stearns is trying to do, where every year it's new guys you never heard of, and they're going out and having borderline all-star caliber years out of the pen. Then they're parted with. Why? Because Tampa knows they can replace him without a problem. Like they're not losing any sleep. The same way that they had no problem trading Brooks Raley to the Mets last offseason. They're just going to constantly churn out these really strong pitchers, not only because they have a great pitching lab, but also knowing placement, their uniqueness for certain arm slots, for certain pitches against matchups is what has separated the Rays from a lot of the rest in the league. That's what the Mets are trying to build here, and that's what we can hopefully see in years going further. But aside from those, Jordan Hicks, big arm, but that walk rate, that's something to make note of. Can he stay in control? That's the case with a lot of these guys, and I don't see the Mets, to your point, the more I think about it, the more I don't foresee them spending huge bucks on many relievers. But if you're going to, I think a Robertson, a 1 year, $8 to $9 million deal, maybe a little less, because I know he got 1 year for 10 heading into last season, and his numbers with Miami weren't great. I just think it's because he really didn't want to leave New York. I think that certainly played a factor. But aside from that, I think we're going to see plenty more of 1 year, split contracts, guys with a nasty slider, but oh my God, their fastball is shit, or, vice versa. Like, I think while being smart about grabbing as much as you can and throwing it on the wall to see what sticks is a good thing, as long as you're not just grabbing random relievers, but there's a thought process, there's a breakdown. The Mets really like him for this reason, the Mets like him for that reason, and that is how I could see the Mets hopefully staying relatively healthy throughout the year with their rotation and pen, because we've seen the past couple years since Steve Cohen became owner, and well before that, this team just has no true grasp of what it means to have quality depth instead of bringing up guys almost from the AA level early to mid-season. Like, Denny Reyes should not be pitching a fucking game for us, yet here we are. Like, these things should not happen, let alone as early as they did to begin the 2023 season. So I think Stearns is really putting a heavy emphasis on trying to eliminate as much of those uncertainties where what you have. It's just a matter of how much can we get out of you? And if that doesn't work, okay, we go on to the next, because we have this guy we're waiting on right away. It's his time to shine. If he doesn't work, okay, we have this guy as well. Do you feel similar in that thought process, or do you expect things to be different?
Totally. I mean, if you listen to how Stearns was described his bullpen, like the bullpen on game 1 versus midseason versus game 1, 162, like those are 3 entirely different bullpens when you look at teams historically. That's something he understands, and that's why he doesn't usually throw big money at relievers who are extremely volatile. He's going to look at the projections, pay the guys that look good in the projections that might be kind of high value plays, but he's not going to throw, big money. Like, they're not going to be in on Josh Hader realistically. Like, he wants to close games. That doesn't make sense for them. But, I do think there's something to be said for, like, they need some floor in this bullpen outside of Diaz. That's where a guy like Robertson may make sense. But, like, they said they will field a good bullpen when the season is open. Milwaukee has always had a good bullpen. Stearns knows how to find these guys. And he's comfortable that you don't need to pay relievers $30-40 million to make that happen.
Yeah, and that's a really important aspect to evaluate the Mets offseason. We love the names. Like, here's for example, and look, if the Mets get him, I'll still do my best to be an advocate for it, but Hector Neris is a name I've heard a lot of this offseason, coming off of a big year with the Houston Astros. Since he arrived in Houston, the guy's been nails a lot of the times. What do I think of Hector Neris? I think of everything he did with the Philadelphia Phillies. A lot of similarities to Jeurys Familia, and a guy that every time he matched up against the Mets, mind you, when the Mets were not a great team many of those years, he got pieced up. And he's one person. I think we could make this example. If you want, you could do it for Robertson and others, where they may have the track record from recent years, but they're already in their mid to late 30s. And Stearns' whole thought process is not on just what you've done. It's truly what you're going to do, and a different role, a new role. And that's why I think we need to not only just be fixated on the numbers, but truly fit. And that's where someone like Neris, I just don't personally, and this is my fandom talking more than anything, I don't see it, because I just feel like the guy's going to get pieced up right away. Because the Astros, what do they have that the Phillies didn't during his time in Philly? A pitching lab, one of the best in baseball. And why are the Astros going to have probably no problems parting with Neris should he not return? Because they know that they can fill his role relatively well within. That is what separates good organizations from great organizations, and that is, again, why we shouldn't get thought on this process. Okay, we have to get Hader. We have to get Liam Hendricks. We have to get so-and-so. We need to trade for this guy and this guy and that guy. It's great in theory, but we've learned over the past number of years that to have sustained success, that isn't necessarily the way to go about it.
Absolutely. Development is the difference. And, like, they have, thrown money into, like, pitching labs and being able to develop these guys. Like, they know that they will not be able to be a consistent contender without the development piece, which is why they're bringing in all these new guys who they hope, will help in that aspect. But no doubt, like, they're banking on, development, identifying areas where players can improve, and then actually executing there and seeing the improvement from those players.
So 2 comments I'd like to address here, and then we'll get close to wrapping things up. Let's see. Mets have a pitching lab now, Wardy. They do, but it ain't good yet. Like, the Mets had no analytics group at all. Literally, none, when Steve Cohen first became owner. And we've heard over this year, since Stearns came in, a little underwhelmed on like what we were working with. Like, we do not have a lot still. The Mets aren't nearly to the T of the Rays, the Dodgers, and some other the Astros, for example, because these are teams that have not only built this, but have had this mindset and philosophy for at minimum the past decade versus working on the fly. And what has Steve Cohen tried to do since he became owner? He's trying to troubleshoot, you know? And these patchworks might work in instances. They might work for a couple months, but they're not going to help you with sustained success. And then the other comment I want to address from John as well, you know, throwing crap on the wall is not a good plan. I'd like to reiterate, it's not about throwing crap on the wall per se, as it is by landing a boatload of options where there's valid reasoning as to why the Mets acquired each of them. Even if it comes down to one pitch that they have that the Mets favor, that's still better than just saying, okay, we see these guys, they profile decent, let's just go sign them right away. Like that is not what David Stearns is trying to do. If you think he's just grabbing guys for the sake of grabbing them because they just got put on waivers, it's the farthest thing from the truth. So I can understand some reluctancy from fans because saying, oh, okay, we're getting a lot of these names that we don't know too well. I don't love that idea. I would just preface to wait it out to see how this is going to play out, because with bullpens especially, they are always the biggest toss-up every single year. Even on paper, when they look the prettiest, Edwin Diaz getting down, the season was already done before we know it, right? So, and you want to make sure you don't put yourself in a position where you're that heavy on one or two guys in your pen. You need to have A, B, C, D, all the way to Z options. And what we've seen over the past number of years, the Mets just have not had it nearly to the liking, nearly to the ability that we've seen with other clubs.
Yeah. I mean, and you're going to have to take risks with guys. Like, if you think about, you know, like Miguel Castro, like the ups were so high, the downs were so low. Like, that's how these relievers are. And you hope that these guys hit their stride for a good portion of the season. They'll inevitably have their lows. And you hope that other guys kind of step up when that happens. And that's kind of how he views it. Like, there's a strategic component here of like paying players that they think, you know, either can turn it around, or they like one or two pitches, or you thought, you know, one pitch was underutilized and they could really help. So these are things that they're thinking through. But no doubt there's strategy involved with the guys they're adding.
Yeah, no, wholeheartedly agree. PB, thank you so much for your $10 donation. Great show tonight. Congrats. Thank you so much. I appreciate that a lot. And I think that's where we're going to wrap things, Michael. So I want to thank everyone so much. We went over an hour tonight. Always a great conversation, talking shop with Mike, who does a fantastic job this offseason, has again been on the money, talking all things baseball. So, Michael, can you please let people know where they can find you before we get out of here?
Absolutely. Marino MLB on Twitter is where you can find me.
Is there
And Wardy, thank you so much for having me.
Of course, thank you. I appreciate you hopping on. You're always like, when I ask, it's like without question, okay, yes, it's just a matter of when, getting that figured out. So I always greatly appreciate that. Anything that you would like to share with the people before we get out of here? Like, do you have any upcoming work that you're excited about? Like anything of that nature?
Cooking up some things, but I'm not quite there yet to put it out into the universe.
Okay.
But definitely working on some things. Expect I will be active as usual on my Twitter, reporting what I know as I can.
Awesome. Sounds good. Well, Michael, thank you so much again. It's always a pleasure. Shout out everyone that watched live on a replay, people on replay. Let us know your biggest takeaway from tonight's show down below in the comments. Stay tuned. As of now, I already have a video that I recorded 2 days ago that will be coming out early tomorrow, barring any changes. Live stream probably tomorrow evening as well. Stay tuned. Daily content, WardyNYM. You know the drill. Thank you guys so much for watching.